Hello viewers! Have you ever heard of an engine modification called EGR Delete? Now many will claim this is a true problem solver that eliminates all issues caused by this emission control device, and some will even say it'll up the engine's performance. But is any of this true, or is it just one of those urban myths with no real-life foundings? Well, that's exactly what we'll try to figure out in this video. But before we do that, let's briefly explain what the EGR does and how the EGR delete is performed. The EGR is short for exhaust gas recirculation, which returns a portion of exhaust gases back into the engine where they get burnt once again. And by doing so, it reduces the NOx content and consequently lowers emissions. Now we won't explain in detail how this system works, as we have a separate video dedicated to this. Instead, let's talk about the EGR delete, which, as the name would suggest, eliminates it from the engine bay. And there are two ways of doing this: blocking off its passages, removing all associated hardware from the engine, or doing a software deactivation. But in any case, the end result is the same. The exhaust gases won't be flowing into the engine anymore. Now, the EGR delete, like pretty much everything else, has its upsides and drawbacks, so let's see what they are. When speaking about the advantages of EGR removal, potential power gains definitely have to be at the top of the list. With exhaust gases out of the equation, the engine will have more air at its disposal, consequently increasing its output. That's of course assuming it gets enough fuel to go with the extra oxygen, which is why most cars need a software update after the EGR is removed. While the EGR system is good for the environment as it reduces air pollution, it also impacts fuel economy slightly. In essence, as it breathes in the mixture of air and exhaust gases, your engine won't be as efficient as it could be. So by removing the EGR, you might see a slight increase in gas mileage. In some cars, especially diesel-powered ones, exhaust gases may contain a lot of soot, and this, once it gets into the engine through the EGR, can create thick carbon buildups inside its cylinders. If severe enough, this can mess up the combustion process and cause your engine to run sluggish or hotter than it should, and if you eliminate the EGR, this won't be happening anymore. The EGR system, when it's working as it should, doesn't have a particularly negative effect on the engine, but as soon as something's off, it may be very damaging. Apart from the said soot, the EGR valve may get stuck or not sealed properly, allowing too much exhaust gases into the engine and consequently damaging it. Or if you have an EGR cooler, it may develop a leak and cause your engine to lose coolant. And if the EGR is deleted, you won't have to worry about any of that. You know that famous Murphy's Law, whatever can go wrong will go wrong. Well, if we follow the same logic, what isn't there, it can go wrong. So after deleting the EGR, you won't have to worry about soot, clogged valves or internal coolant leaks anymore. This can make your car more reliable and save you some money on repairs. At this point, removing the EGR from your car may seem like a great idea, but there are, however, some downsides to this, with increased emissions being one of them. After all, the whole purpose of the EGR system is to make the exhaust gases less harmful to the environment. Sure, some of you will wave your arm and say, "I don't care about that," but the fact is that your car may fail its smoke test depending on how strictly it's done. And as we shall explain later, EGR delete is illegal in most places. If you block off the EGR system, exhaust gases won't go into the intake anymore. Instead, the engine will get more fresh air, which contains more oxygen. But because the ECM doesn't know that, it won't add extra fuel to go with it, making the mixture lean. And if severe enough, this can cause a very damaging engine knock. This is why once the EGR delete is performed, the ECM software has to be updated, which is not a simple job. In some cars, the engine's exhaust might become a bit louder after the EGR system has been removed, which would be most noticeable on idle or while cruising at steady speeds. This, however, doesn't happen on all models, and even when it does, the difference in exhaust sound isn't very drastic. Still, even as such, it's worth mentioning. Last, but by no means less important, is the question of the legality of the whole procedure. The fact is that tampering with the EGR or any other emission control device is illegal in all 50 states across the US. So strictly speaking, your car won't be road legal if you've deleted the EGR and should only be used on tracks or off-road trails. Sure, that might not stop you from removing the EGR system anyway, but be aware that you're breaking the law by doing so and could get a fine if caught. If you live outside the US, the regulation may differ, with the EGR delete not being seen as an illegal mode, so it's best to check this before moving forward. There are 3 ways of doing the EGR delete, though the end result will be the same: stopping the exhaust gases from getting into the intake. A simpler option is to block it off with a metal plate, which is usually placed between the intake manifold and the EGR valve. And with all bits and pieces still in their places, the system will look intact. Another option is to remove all EGR hardware, including the control valve and all interconnecting pipes and hoses. Once this is done, the holes in the intake and exhaust manifold are sealed off with appropriate metal plates. Apart from physically stopping the exhaust gases, you'll have to update the ECM's software so it can adjust the engine's running parameters to match the new conditions. Otherwise, you might have issues like misfire or engine knock and may even see a drop in performance. In addition, if you remove the EGR hardware, the check engine light would be on. Lastly, we have a software method which involves updating the car's ECM so it keeps the EGR valve closed all the time. This version is probably the most effective and can be reverted easily. The bits and pieces needed for the EGR delete are not expensive. In most cases, you'll need 1 or 2 metal plates cut into a specific shape, which you can make by yourself with some basic tools. Even if you buy a ready-made kit, it'll set you back less than $100. The fitment is usually a straightforward job, assuming the axis is not obstructed by other engine components. The all-important ECM software update, however, is a whole different story. If you have a more elaborate, manufacturer-specific diagnostic device, you could download ready-made EGR removal software for your specific model. But if some things go wrong during this update, you could end up frying the ECM. With that in mind, it may be better to have this done by a professional tuner, which could cost anywhere between $100 to $1,000. So there you have it, viewers. I hope that now, once you know all the upsides and drawbacks of the EGR delete, deciding whether you want this on your car or not will be easier. And if so, don't forget to press that like button and subscribe to our channel. But I must point out once more, this procedure might be illegal where you live, so make sure to check local regulation before doing anything. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask in the comment section below. Someone is bound to know the answer.